Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link and sponsored by Tungsten, built on OB10 e-invoicing. So today we're looking at how to be an effective and successful purchase-to-pay process owner. So if you're in purchase to pay and you're a process owner, then you've absolutely come to the right webinar today. So my name is Susie West, and I am the host for today. And I'm very pleased to be presenting as my expert speaker, Danny Thompson, who is Program Manager at Tungsten. Danny is going to be introducing himself shortly, but not only is he very expert at helping organizations deploy e-invoicing and supply chain financing within the Tungsten network, but he also has a very deep history within being a global process owner himself at various corporations. So great to have Danny with us today. You, of course, have a vital role to play, which is to absolutely make sure that you get the most out of your investment of time. 60 minutes is a long time these days in business, so make sure every single minute works for you. You just need to make sure that you get all the questions that you're seeking answers to, or answers that you're seeking. So put your questions to me directly. All you need to do is just pop that question to me in the box that's highlighted in the red line here. Submit that to me, and I will put your question to Danny in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. I'm going to just be touching briefly on the background of this session and then be handing over to Danny, and then we'll be concluding with a summary and taking your questions in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So just to serve us some context, we're doing this as a repeat because of popular demand. There are a number of people in the market who specifically wanted us to replay this webinar. We did it a couple of months ago, and it was very successful then, and we're repeating it now. And just to give you a bit of a context as to how we came to the first webinar, Tungsten approached Shared Services Link, and that was probably about 5 or 6 months ago now, to specifically drill into the role of a purchase-to-pay process owner. What did a purchase-to-pay process owner look like? What was their background? What did their character need to represent, etc.? And they came to us specifically wanting us to research this area. So we went into a study together to research the market and really answer some of these key questions. And I'm very pleased to say that an infographic report came out as a result of that research. And what we're doing in this webinar, and what we did a couple of months ago in the first webinar, is to really illustrate some of the key findings that came out of that study. So we're going to be sharing that with you right now. So with no further ado, I'd like to hand over to Danny Thompson. Over to you, Danny.
Thank you, Susie. It's a pleasure to join the call today. And as you said, there is a great interest at Tungsten, and also just I personally have a great interest in this subject area. I've got a little over 15 years experience in the P2P process automation space for shared services organizations, large multinational companies, with 9 years at International Paper Company, attached to their shared services organization, and most recently at Pfizer, where I was the global process driver for Invoice to Pay, the payments end of P2P. And along with other automation and global shared services type projects, I, at both companies, led e-invoicing projects. And in fact, at Pfizer, we implemented the Tungsten e-invoicing solution, which led ultimately to my joining Tungsten, and now I'm the head of product management for the team at the Tungsten network, responsible for the P2P automation solutions that we have, what they do, how they do it, and how they'll do it in the future. And I kind of look at it as sort of a variation of a P2P process owner role, in that we're building out solutions that address and standardize processes across a variety of global organizations. Over the last few years, we've seen companies, our customers and prospects take kind of a more end-to-end view of supplier networks and invoice automation, and this trend has coincided with an increase in the number of P2P process owners that we see in these companies, and those individuals are involved in the selection process for solutions like ours. So we wanted to know more about these obviously increasingly important players in our customer base, and was our real motivation behind getting involved and asking Shared Services Link to embark on the survey. So now I'll share a bit of information about the survey participants and their roles in the companies that they are in today. First, let's talk about our respondents, who they are, who did we survey. And the survey covered a wide range of organization sizes. We hit 94 people who are either P2P process owners or work within P2P operations, and about a third come from really large organizations with 50,000 employees or more, and the balance, of course, were with companies of smaller size. Let's start out with a survey question, a poll question of the participants on the call today, so we can know who we're speaking to. Susie?
That's great. Thanks very much, Danny. So coming up, we've got 6 poll questions today. So let's start with the first. For the benefit of those that haven't been on our webinars before, all you need to do is just tick the box or the button that relates to your own situation, and we share the results live. So it's great benchmarking data. So question number 1, for poll question number 1, is the purchase to pay global process owner role already established in your organization today? Yes, no, or perhaps you're planning to introduce the GPO role imminently. 69% of you responded. If you haven't already done so, let's try and get this north of 70. We always try and get this tipping the better side of 70, please. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. So probably not too much of a surprise. We've got, if you can see coming up on your screen now, we've got 62% of you saying yes, that you do have the GPO role in place today, and 38% of you saying no. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, so let's see if we have a bit more success with the next one. Okay, back to you, please, Danny.
Well, thanks. Those results match up fairly well with the survey participants. Maybe a little bit more in our survey had the role in place already. About a quarter of those surveyed had yet to set up the role. About 30% had the role for less than a year. Another 30 less than 5 years, and only 17% have had the role in place for more than 5 years. And this reflects what we've seen. There were a few trailblazers in the early to mid-2000s, but the implementation of this role really gained more momentum around, say, 2009, 2010, and has been ballooning ever since. As I say, it's getting more and more traction as we head into the future. A little bit more about our respondents. The vast majority of process owners are over the age of 35, which to me indicates this is a fairly senior role. And the survey results that we'll discuss a bit later kind of reveal why that is. I think for now we can say that the role is usually populated by someone in the first or second tier of management within shared services or procurement. And we've also seen the survey reveal that about 2/3 of the participants are men. Some process owners have global responsibility, 3 out of 5 in our survey. A smaller portion have responsibility for a single country or region. And this tends to track with the scope of shared services in a given company, and probably rightfully so. If shared services is global, then the process owner is global as well and typically is focused on bringing the whole globe under a single process. If shared services is regional or there's no shared services organization, then the process owner role, it tends to be more focused because there's maybe a lot more heavy lifting to do, a lot more detailed work to be done to bring everything in the P2P space under control. And tends to be what we see out in the marketplace. Reporting lines. Remembering that this is a P2P process owner role that we're talking about, it's really interesting to see that 60% of the survey participants report into finance, 23% into procurement, but only a handful, only 7% report into both ends of the P2P spectrum. 67% sit within shared services. This raises a question. Are the P2P process owners really responsible for the end-to-end process? And if so, why don't they have reporting lines into both organizations, finance and procurement? I think in my experience, the answer is that not normally are they responsible for all ends of the P2P spectrum. This is changing, but what has been the model in the past has been that process ownership was first adopted by the financial shared services organizations. And, you know, the process owners were needed to help drive standardization in shared services. Particularly as shared services began to expand its scope beyond the original geography. As they expanded into new countries, they needed someone to help enforce a global model. And shared services tended to set up 3 process owners, a P2P owner, O2C, order-to-cash owner, and a R2R, record-to-report owner, to cover the full spectrum of shared services. And since only some portions of the P2P and O2C processes were under control of shared services, then the owners, the P2P and O2C owners within shared services really only had responsibility for controlling the part of the process that was under shared services control. They would interact with their counterparts in purchasing, but wouldn't have authority over procurement activities, catalogs, contracts, et cetera. And this was the case at Pfizer for us. Originally, there was a P2P process owner set up in accounts payable, but that person was the former head of accounts payable and only had real authority over AP activities. Later, in about 2008, 2009, the company broke apart the role into more of a team approach, as we've seen with some other large companies. And so, for example, at Oracle, there's sort of a figurehead P2P process owner with 2 to 4 sub-process owners, typically one for indirect procurement, one for direct procurement, one for AP, and maybe even one for T&E or master data management. Let's talk about geographies. In what country are you based? Our survey participants, as you can see from this map, are overwhelmingly from North America and Western Europe. And this is interesting despite the fact that 67% of them are in the shared services organizations. They tend to be onshore rather than offshore with the people who are doing the clerical work associated with shared services. And part of the reason I think that this is so is because a lot of what the process owner is doing is strategic, and companies want to keep that strategic ownership closer to the main organization. And then another reason I think this is the case is that the process owner roles have tended to be staffed with people who were sort of the super users in shared services that have been, as shared services was being outsourced, these people took responsibility for defining the process and just serving as the experts on the process going forward. Perhaps this was also a way of kind of retaining the best and brightest talent as many of the jobs were moving overseas. So let's talk about the definition of the process owner role. We, along with our partners at Shared Services Link, created this definition, and 95% of the survey participants agreed with it, so we feel pretty good about it. Our definition is a process owner has control and ownership of the end-to-end process to the extent that changes to the established process cannot be made without the process owner's permission. So they're defining what's going to be done and how it's going to be done in the organization. Next question was, why was the P2P process owner role created? And as you can see, a variety of reasons were given, but the two that topped the 50% mark were sort of as you would expect. They were to standardize the process and improve process performance. To a great extent, this is Shared Services 101. The more spend or volume, transaction volume you can get under the control of a single process, then the greater impact any change you make to it will have. So grab as much real estate as you can, standardize it, improve it, and then repeat that process over and over again to maximize results. The third most popular reason on this list is support strategic objectives, and this aligns with something else we commonly see. Companies decide they're going to implement shared services more broadly, or they're going to execute a global ERP initiative. They see a variety of systems and processes on the roadmap ahead and realize they need somebody to take control of that and enforce the global model, digest challenges to that global model, and with enough seniority, knowledge, and expertise, sort of effectively customize the model for local challenges based on regulatory requirements or unique business requirements in those countries. So the first assignment that we see many process owners take is to develop a global model and perhaps even a global ERP model and carry it forward in what's often a multi-year ERP deployment schedule. The rest of these reasons are things that are just more natural outcomes of having this role in place. The next question is about KPIs, key performance indicators. And as you know, many organizations measure themselves against key performance indicators and report those out to report their value to the company. And we were curious about which ones were most impacted by the introduction of the process owner role. And you can see many impacts were reported. The first two, well, the first one is Pio Compliance, and it relates directly to the enforcement of a no PO, no pay policy, which is very common among organizations who have process owners in order to drive out maverick spend and to put spend under management. A key control that has to be in place is AP's enforcement of no PO, no pay. So if an invoice comes in, it doesn't have a purchase order on it, then procurement needs AP to reject that invoice back to the supplier so that the supplier will learn to make sure they have a PO before they provide a good or service to the company. And a P2P process owner is perfectly placed to understand that requirement coming out of procurement and to set up the enforcement of the rule in AP. And our survey participants indicate that it's having a good impact. Then there are all the benefits that AP Shared Services is looking for: cost per invoice, number of invoices per AP FTE, percentage of automation, etc., all positively impacted by the role. Let's move on to activity ownership. We asked participants which parts of the process and activities they own. You can see the only part owned by a majority of the survey participants is AP process design. Less so for procurement design, and 47% own AP operations. That's a really interesting result for us because we get a lot of mixed feedback around ownership of operations. Susie and I have debated it many times. On the one hand, owning operations can give the process owner real power to enforce a process and to change a process. But on the other hand, ownership of operations brings it with it just the day-to-day distraction of getting invoices processed and paid, and can really hinder the process owner's ability to focus on strategic problems. So we find a lot of process owners who own operations say they simply don't have any time in their day to focus on the strategic. We see a lot of process owners wishing they didn't own operations. Kind of a related quirk to this is that you see people sometimes moving into the process owner role who don't have a day-to-day operational bend to them. They're people who are more designers and engineers than operators. They really like taking on the big redesign project and saying how things ought to work, but they're not really the kinds of people who like to make the trains run on time. So sometimes you get someone in this role who's an individual contributor who maybe isn't quite right for operations management. In a few cases, we've seen a really successful process owner who did own operations, but in every case that I've seen at least, and I think Susie would agree, those people had some very strong operations managers taking care of the day-to-day responsibilities, which gave the process owner the space to focus on the more strategic type activities. Enforcing process. So now we'll turn to questions around the enforcement of process, and we'll start with another poll question. Susie?
That's great. Thank you very much. So coming up on your screen now, what authority do you or does your GPO have to enforce the process? Is it a case that the GPO can fully enforce the process? So you're completely supported and you can mandate the compliance of that process. The GPO has authority to enforce but struggles to actually make those changes. The GPO can encourage and advise, but you don't actually have specific authority to mandate change. Or perhaps the GPO, or perhaps yourself being the GPO, is unable to enforce the process. So this is a very interesting question, and obviously Danny's going to go into a little bit more about what we found in our research in just a moment. We're 54% of you responding, so if you haven't already done so, please do tick the box or the box that most represents your situation or represents it exactly. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's see if we're a bit more successful in seeing the results come up on the screen. So you should have the results being shared with you. Let's just see if they come up. And just while we're waiting, let's see what we've got here. So we've got 61% of you saying that you can enforce the process, but you generally struggle to make that enforcement. 22% of you saying that you can encourage and advise, but you don't actually have the authority to change behaviour. 11% of you are actually unable to enforce the process. 6% of you are what I would classify as quite fortunate. You can fully enforce the process. Back to you, please, Danny.
Yeah, those results, they track very similarly to what we found in the survey. We had a little bit higher percentage of participants who could fully enforce the process, but likewise, we had large numbers who had authority but struggled to exercise it or to make changes, and even a bigger percentage who said their only ability was to encourage and advise. And you know, those are very interesting results if you think about someone whose reason for being is to own a process, yet they have no real authority to enforce it. It's just an amazing result to me, and I think it warrants a bit of digging. So let's dig into it with another poll question. Back over to you, Susie.
Okay, good. So coming up on your screen now, we have a poll which is about the challenges that you face when it comes to process ownership. So please tick all that apply. Is it a case that processes are varied across the business, so you're struggling with that? IT resource presents an issue. Maybe you're struggling to get the resource, or maybe you're struggling because you've got multiple systems or ERPs. The lack of authority that you have to enforce the process model that you were talking about earlier presents a challenge for you. Perhaps your process is highly manual and there's a lack of automation, and maybe you're not being allowed to have budget for automation. Or perhaps there's a resistance to change generally within the business. So if you could tick the boxes in this case, the boxes that apply to your own situation, I'm sure there'll be at least 2 or 3 that really call out to you. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're bang on 70% there, so thank you for that. Let's have a look, see if the results come up on your screen now. Let me talk you through the results. So we've got 63% of you saying that you're seeing resistance to change within the business and that this is a particular pain point for you, so that's 63%. 58% of you saying that you're struggling with IT resource availability or issues, or you've got multiple systems or ERPs. 53% of you are struggling because you've got varied processes across the business. 32% of you saying that you've got lack of authority, so that really kind of connects with the earlier poll, and 16% of you saying that your process is highly manual. So interesting to see the kind of the key pain points there. Resistance to change within the business is the big one, followed by the second big one, which is around IT resource issues or multiple systems ERP. Back to you, please, Danny.
These are really interesting results. Resistance to change within the business, 63%. I think our survey highlighted the importance that this might be the most important issue for process owners to attack, and that is their authority to enforce the process model. Specifically, we took a look at the KPIs question from earlier in the survey and compared it against the survey participants who said they had full enforcement authority and those who said they did not have the authority to enforce the process. And the difference in results were dramatic, maybe not surprising, but they were dramatic, and that is, if you look at the KPI for straight-through processing, those who had full enforcement authority reported, 93% of them reported an improvement in straight-through processing, while only 50% of those who didn't have enforcement authority reported an improvement in straight-through processing. I think this is an argument you can take to your management to help encourage management to give you the authority you need to enforce the processes. The second KPI was invoices per AP FTE, and that has a direct cost implication. Those with full enforcement authority, 86% of those with full enforcement authority reported an improvement, while only 59% of those without reported an improvement. So what enables you to enforce the process? Some said they could, some say they couldn't. It looks like our survey participants rely almost to a T to senior management support. A full 3/4 of the participants said that that's what they rely on. Others use the key performance indicators, personal relationships, as a means to achieve the end. Some are managing operations, but not that many. Some have budget control, but obviously the main one is senior management support. Now back to you, Susie, for a few more poll questions.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Danny. So again, coming up on your screen, we've got 3 back-to-back polls here. So coming up on your screen, we specifically want to find out about e-invoicing and how that features within your remit today. So please tick the box that applies. Does e-invoicing feature within your remit today? Yes, we already have an e-invoicing program in place. Yes, we're planning to introduce electronic invoicing. And when we talk about e-invoicing, we're not really talking about EDI. We're certainly not talking about emailing PDFs. We're talking about using a network like the Tungsten network for e-invoicing. So yes, we're planning to introduce e-invoicing. No, but we should be looking at this. No, we're not. Or perhaps you're unsure today. So please tick the box which is most representative of your situation. Closing the poll. We've got 50% of you responding, so if you haven't already done so, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. Okay, coming up on your screen now. Let's see the results here. Okay, 25% of you say that yes, you've already got it in place. So congratulations to you. Encouragingly, 25% of you saying yes, we're planning to introduce e-invoicing. So good luck to you. I think this webinar will help you. 6% of you say no, we're not, but we should be. 19% of you say no, it doesn't feature in your remit. So that's quite interesting. Perhaps you're more on the procurement side. Perhaps you don't have the GPA model in place today. 25% of you are not too sure. Okay, good. Let's go to our next poll in the 3 that we've got back to back here, coming up on your screen now. We want to find out how many invoices you're processing annually, please. Is it less than 50,000 per annum? 50 to 150,000 per annum? 150 to 300,000 per annum? Is it more than 300,000 invoices that you are processing per annum? If you're not entirely sure, have a good educated guess and let us have your results, and that will give us an idea as to the kind of the scale of the organization that we have on this webinar today. How many invoices do you process annually, paper and electronic? Less than 50,000, between 50 and 150,000, 150 to 300,000, more than 300,000. We're still waiting for a few more votes to come in. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's see if we have 54% of you responding there. Coming up on your screen now. Let's have a look at the results. Yes, normally our kind of webinars do attract organizations that have scale, have 300,000 or more invoices per annum, and this is reflected in these results here. 47% of you have received 300,000 invoices per annum or more. Then we move down to the lower bracket of 150 to 300,000, and 7% of you are in that bracket. Interestingly, quite a lot of you, 40% of you, are in the 50 to 150,000 bracket, and a small amount of you are in the less than 50,000 bracket. Moving on to our final question for this webinar. So that's poll question number 6. We want to find out, please, how you currently receive your invoices from your suppliers today. So please tick all that apply. Is it, if you tick maybe the 3 that are kind of represent the main way that you receive invoices today, is it mainly via paper, so it's a manual process? Is it mainly through scanning or OCR technology? Is it mainly through EDI? Is it mainly through electronic invoicing? Or is it mainly through email PDF? I can see the results coming in. It's already very interesting, so I'm keen to share them with you. We're at 46% of you responding, so please do let us know how you're mainly receiving invoices today. If you can tick the 3 main kind of methods that you use to receive your accounts payable invoices from your suppliers today, only at 50% of you. So if you haven't already responded, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. 57% of you responded to that. So let's have a look at the results. Okay, what we've got here is 31% of you. So the winner is 31% of you are receiving invoices today through scanning and OCR. So many people would argue that there are still a number of touch points there. And with those touch points, there's opportunity for additional savings potentially. 25% of you receive invoices manually via paper. Doesn't sound like you're using scanning or OCR for that. You're keying those in. 25% of you through emailed PDFs. 13%, so quite a low number. 13% using electronic invoicing networks, and 6% through EDI. Interesting results. Back to you, please, Danny.
Thanks, Susie. Yeah, those are interesting results. Lots of opportunities for process improvement identified there, which is what this group is all about. So the next question we asked participants was, what sort of influence do they have over technology? And what we generally found was they have some sort of joint authority over technology solutions commonly shared with IT, and with more influence on priorities and design than on resources and budget. And of course, money talks. So budget is something that I think people in a process ownership role should best make their best effort at having a great influence on. Let's talk about skills, experience, and aspirations of the process owners in our survey. We asked, what skills should a model process owner have to be successful? Notice that 4th on the list is in-depth process knowledge. The first 3 are change management, communication, and influence and authority within the business. These are all about softer skills and reputation and respect. And I think that these support the idea that this is a mid-management to senior management role, and it's really a job for grown-ups. It's not just about tinkering with process. It's about organizing and driving real change in the business. And a lot of what's required to do that, particularly if you don't have direct responsibility for all of the areas that impact the process, a lot of what's involved is meeting with stakeholders, engaging senior management to get them excited about what you want to do, and making sure that everything is falling in place as you try to apply and enforce the processes that you want to put in place. What is your functional experience? I guess we shouldn't be surprised, since most people are coming out of shared services, that finance is the top one here. We've got a bunch from shared services management, and a smaller percentage from procurement or P2P management. And I think what we can expect in the years ahead, particularly as procurement continues to wake up to the idea of P2P process ownership and does more to centralize procurement activities, I think 5 years, 10 years from now, we'll see these percentages balancing out a bit more. About the process owner's career, did you move from another company to be in this role? 30%, yes, did come from another company, but 69% came from inside the company. Process owner career, where are you taking this? Well, where would you like to go next? And some would like to go to shared services management. Some want a more responsible role in a process ownership task. But then many others want to go to many other in many other directions. And I think that just speaks to the role as a launching point to go a lot of different ways. And who would have thought 3 years ago, when I was in a similar role, that I would end up heading the product management team for a third-party service provider. It's been a very enjoyable move for me, a change for me that gives me a perspective on more than one company, but something I wouldn't have expected before I got into the process ownership game. And I think the idea here is that people should see this as a career enabler rather than any sort of a dead end. So we've come to the end of our survey, and looking back on the results, have digested the results down to 5 factors for success and effectiveness, and I'll take you through those right now. First, number 1 is ownership of operations. Ownership can help you achieve your objectives, but you've got to make sure that you've got the bandwidth to focus on the strategic. And to the extent that you don't have the ability to focus on strategy and build relationships with the key stakeholders, then you need someone else to take over the day-to-day responsibility of operations. The second factor for success and effectiveness is enforce process compliance. You've got to do this in accordance with the peculiarities of your given company's culture, but what we've seen from the results is those with full enforcement authority have much more influence on outcomes than those who don't. So as you're setting up the role and as you try to grow in the role, do the best you can to gain enforcement authority over your process. Number 3, senior management support is key. We saw this as the primary enabler of our survey participants to enforce their processes, and it really just makes sense. Senior management support is what you need to be able to enforce the process and make the big changes that you want to make in the company. So spend a good bit of your time engaging with senior management, selling your ideas, and making sure that you have their support. Number 4, take responsibility. And that just means take responsibility for the process, grab control of it, and don't let go. You need to have a strong voice in solution design, in technology priorities, and in budget if you can get a hold of the budget, so you can make sure that your vision for the future is implemented. And number 5, the 5th factor for success and effectiveness, is build your change management and communication skills. not only are you going to have to engage senior management, but you're going to have to engage extensive stakeholders, AP operations, procurement, the CFO, the financial heads of all the various divisions. There are just so many people who have an influence on what happens in AP and in procurement that you need to be able to engage with all of those individuals across the company and execute change and lead change across all those various areas in order to get the results you want as the global process owner for P2P. So now with all of these bits of information, you can deliver real change for the P2P process. To get a little bit more insight, you can download 7 lessons GPOs want you to learn. This is available on the Tungsten Network and also on the Shared Services link site. Go to either place to download this advice from your process owner peers. And of course, if you want to get some more information about the Tungsten Network and how our supplier portal and e-invoicing and process automation solutions can work for you and have helped other companies and governments achieve results, feel free to contact us at info@tungsten-network.com. Back to you, Susie.
That's great, Danny. Thank you very much. So please continue to send through your questions, and I will kick off with a number of questions that I've got already in. So we've got a question. I'll start with knowledge and skill set, Danny. So one viewer is asking, surely technical knowledge is critical, otherwise change management may be misdirected and credibility lost. What's your response to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely a need for detailed process knowledge and detailed technical knowledge that has to be available to the global process owner. And the process owner can get that in a couple of ways. One is that they can just have that knowledge on their own from their own experience. But also we've seen process owners get that knowledge by having resources available to them. So either directly reporting to them or maybe having a dotted line reporting relationship to the real process experts.
Looking at all the characteristics that
make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Danny. So next question, looking at all the characteristics that you were talking about that are kind of critical to success, to being a GPO, what would you say are the kind of the standout ones for you?
Well, to me, I think you have to have an idea, a real capability to envision a future process that's more efficient than what you have today. You have to have a real faith in setting a standard rule and enforcing it, even if it makes other people a bit uncomfortable. And you have to have maybe it's political savvy or the juice to communicate with some pretty senior people and gain their support so that you can avoid some of the political games that other people might play to undermine you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Danny. Let's talk specifically about the world of invoices. So what does AP do with invoices that have to be sent back to the vendor? I think this is probably looking in the world of electronics. So in an electronic scenario, what does accounts payable do with invoices that have to be sent back to the vendor, and do they keep track of them, and if so, how?
Yeah, so there are 2 ways that you can send an invoice back to a vendor in an e-invoicing world. One is that the network could reject the invoice up front and give the supplier real-time information about what's wrong with that invoice. And you can do that on the Tungsten network by building specific rules, but we also have global rules, country level rules, and customer-specific rules that provide the necessary feedback to a supplier to know whether their invoice is going to be rejected or not. So, for example, we can check to see if the purchase order that's on the invoice has been assigned to the vendor who's submitting the invoice, and if not, we can give the supplier a real-time message so the supplier can respond in real time rather than waiting days to be for the mail to run both directions. So there's this real-time error messaging. And then secondly, we track an invoice through the whole process. So the invoice is submitted on our network and it's received in the accounts payable system. And then the status of that invoice in the accounts payable system is fed back to our network to provide suppliers visibility to it. And so the invoice could be approved for payment. The invoice could be in some sort of an exception status. Maybe the price isn't exactly right, and procurement needs to review the price, or just the shipping department needs to receive the goods. Or at some point, an invoice might be rejected outright, and in those cases, a message comes to our network and goes to the supplier, notifying the supplier that the invoice has been rejected. Throughout that whole process, the supplier and the customer, the AP department, have full visibility to the invoice and the human-readable version of the invoice over the network.
Okay, good. Thanks, Eddie. In your opinion, Danny, why is a GPO better placed to roll out electronic invoicing than perhaps an accounts payable manager?
Well, there are a lot of decisions that have to be made when you're trying to fully automate a process that impacts the global process model. So you have to make decisions about tax treatment, about whether you're going to enforce a PO, no PO, no pay policy, items like that. Now, I'm not necessarily saying a process owner has to be the one who leads the project, but a process owner is certainly going to weigh in, because what you'd like to get with a program like an e-invoicing program is to make e-invoicing the global standard for the way an invoice will be received by accounts payable. And so you need the process owner to say that that's what the policy is going to be and enforce the policy. And the details around how the invoice is going to be treated if it feeds into the ERP is a detailed design question that just the appropriate resources on the customer side should be involved in.
Okay, good. Thank you, Danny. And what do you believe to be the key benefits that e-invoicing can deliver to organizations that receive and process high volumes of international cross-currency invoices?
Well, there's sort of a lot of questions built into that. The main benefit from, there are really two main benefits from e-invoicing. One is that it's fast. So an invoice that is generated one day could be approved and ready for payment in the AP system that same day. The second benefit relates to a question from earlier. You can build a lot of intelligence into the network that helps the supplier get the invoice right. And that's what suppliers want. They want their invoice to come through to you on the AP side in the way that you want it, so that you can approve it for payment. And so the most help you can give them to get that invoice right on the front end, the better for both of you. And so that's the second real benefit.
Okay, good. So lasting words from you, please, Danny. What would you say to those that relatively high percentage of viewers who are looking to introduce the global process ownership model, what would be your advice for them, and what would be your advice for those who actually have global process ownership in place today?
Interesting. Well, I think the main point of advice is communicate a lot about what you're doing, about where you are and where you're taking the process, and all of the steps along the way. You really want to engage all of the stakeholders throughout the whole process. You don't want to surprise anybody, and by communicating, or really communicating more than you might be comfortable with, you really have a better chance of success in the end. To me, that's the number one bit of advice I can give you as a process owner.
Okay, good. Just one final question from a good friend of mine. What cost savings percentages have you seen with purchase to pay? And I just to cover ourselves, Danny, I'm thinking that's possibly with the invoicing, but also with the GPO model.
Wow. Well, it's hard to put a cost savings on the global process owner model. What we have seen are dramatically higher rates of invoices per FTE for our customers. So I'm sorry, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but well over a doubling of transactions processed by per FTE than you find in a paper or email environment.
Sure. I mean, some like various studies that we've done, it's typically, I mean, it's over 50% that we see. But then I think as well, just bearing in mind when you're building a business case, is you looking at e-invoicing and seeing it as an enabler. So it's not just the kind of the headcount direct savings that come from automating your invoice and getting rid of paper, getting rid of the data entry, etc. You're obviously getting the headcount savings from that, but also it's enabling very exciting opportunities like supply chain financing, dynamic discounting, which can really take your business case into a different kind of stratosphere, really. And also just to kind of follow on from that point, as far as the global process ownership model and the kind of savings that we're seeing being impacted or being delivered to organizations that are deploying the GPO framework, I think on the whole it's possibly a little bit too early to give you a definitive number for that. About 50% of the companies that we've worked with on GPO model have only deployed the GPO model in the last 12 months. So it's, in relative terms, it's quite a new role. There are companies like Oracle and a few others, maybe Microsoft, that have been doing the GPO model for a while, but most companies kind of practicing the GPO model, it's still relatively new. However, what we do say, and I'd like to actually just draw your attention to an event that we do have coming up, and I promise you there is a solid link. There's an event that's taking place in London, and it's looking at the 3 developments that will change your shared services world, and it's looking specifically at the global process ownership development, obviously the development of the global business services construct, and obviously looking at analytics, and which of course Tungsten offer specifically in the kind of the procurement and spend field. And what our positioning here is, and the content we'll be covering, is how shared services are moving away from single-digit savings that have been really kind of haunting their last few years, moving back into double-digit savings because of these 3 very exciting developments. So thank you very much to Danny for covering off that very interesting material. Also just like to point out that we've got the Dynamic Discounting and Supply Chain Financing event taking place in Scottsdale, Arizona, and that's the last week of February. So do come and join us at that if supply chain financing and dynamic discounting is on your radar for next year. And also we have 2 very exciting webinars coming up again in our webinar program, helping you to manage your long tail of unmanaged spend. And also if you are kind of you're overwhelmed because you've got endless calls coming in from your suppliers, we can help you with a webinar that we've got in January. So ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for your time and attention. If you aren't going to be engaging in another webinar before the Christmas break, I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and a relaxing holiday, and many thanks to your time and many thanks to Danny Thompson, and goodbye.